off the back of that, I have my own question of how much are things chalked up to really good framing or good big because that somebody can explain something. And I have some examples in mind. And how much is something because of suggestions going straight to the unconscious mind?
Right. Those two things are probably not as different as you think.
Yeah. Oh, between the framing and the suggestions.
Yeah.
Yes, there's a lot of overlap. I get that. Yeah. It's like those things where you're saying something and somebody's not listening or not picking up on it consciously. How much of an effect does that really have on their behavior or their reality?
You mean like something? So, all right.
Should we get into something right now?
Yeah. Well, did we already start? If we already started, that's fine.
Yeah.
Did we start
Fine.
with the questions?
Yeah, let's start with that.
Yeah. And I know you don't do intros anymore for these things, but I don't know if it would be worth doing just a little. Here's what we're talking about today. Intro, because I want to say this right now. Inside of the context of this podcast, I know that the people that listen to this podcast are not listening from a place of I'm looking to increase my hypnosis skills necessarily. I think the audience for this podcast, as it's emerging at the moment, are people who are curious about life, the universe, and everything in a pragmatic way. Let's say,
Mm-hmm.
So now, to me, hypnosis is an interesting area in that obviously I've done a lot of it, and I don't see it as a special thing that sits outside of everything else about human communication and thought and how we make up our experience in the moment and all of this. It's all going on. Now, I have a distinction between formal and informal hypnosis. Formal hypnosis is simply when you are doing something formally and overtly, and it has been stated, we are doing a thing now, which could be hypnosis. It could also be framed as energy work or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Informal hypnosis, you could see is happening all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We are constantly in one kind of trance or another, and we are constantly receiving suggestions from other people all the time, i.e., what they say to us is being spoken from a particular organization of reality and is at the same time as it's being spoken from that, inviting us into that organization of reality to make sense of it. Everybody is hypnotizing everybody all the time, right? Now, one of the things I've often said about hypnotic communication, which is relevant here to suggestion and framing and these sorts of things, is if you want to think hypnotically about communication, we're all using communication hypnotically, whether we know it or not. But if you want to do it intentionally and strategically, the first shift you want to make is in thinking in terms of what you're looking to evoke in somebody rather than what you're looking to explain to somebody. Right? Vocation than information. It's not that I'm trying to give you information. It's just I want to evoke certain responses in you.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is the first thing about thinking like a hypnotist, or at least like the kind of hypnotist that I would train people to be. And it's thinking in terms of evocation, movement, process, these sorts of things. Now, so the question here is about suggestion. First of all, there's three questions: suggestion, question about confusion, the use of confusion, which again, for people listening in who are not from the world of hypnosis, confusion is often used in the hypnotist's toolkit to get certain shifts in behavior and response and this kind of thing, and can be used in the general communicator's toolkit as well. And the other question was about the relationship between suggestion and framing.
Mm-hmm.
So just to say something again about the concept of framing for people who are not familiar with this. Now, this is not something that is relevant only to hypnosis. It is about how we human beings make sense of things. And we make sense of things within a mental frame, right? Within a set of ideas that help us make sense of what's going on in any given moment. So the way I often teach people about framing is if you imagine we were walking through the world, asking the question silently all the time, what is it that's happening here? What is it that's happening here? What is it that's happening here? Right? And we'll make sense of that and we'll go, oh, so right now I'll go, well, I'm recording a podcast with Alex, right? Why am I recording a podcast with Alex? Why am I not just having a conversation with Alex? Why there's something about this framing, right? So we make sense of things all the time in certain terms. So somebody might look at somebody and the person will frame that. They'll make sense of it as they're giving me a dirty look, right? Somebody else will frame it and make sense of it and go, oh, there's something wrong with so-and-so, right? You can put two entirely different frames around the same experience and make different sense of things. So we're constantly unconsciously framing for ourselves all the time. It's a feature of sense making. So when you change the frame, you change the sense you make of something. This is a huge thing in everyday life. It's a huge thing in coaching. It's a huge thing in conversational change work. It's a huge thing in hypnosis. Now, if you're doing formal hypnosis, and this is for the people watching this, it's not for you, Alex, but
just a note on that frame.
Yeah.
You can also kind of equate frames to a model, because you might use a certain frame to look at the world the way you might look at the world through a certain model. Is that?
Yeah. It's in a sense, a frame is a set of sense that you bring to something. You're a state of affairs. It's a set of sense that you bring to a state of affairs to make sense of that state of affairs. You can get two people watching a soccer match and one person's having an incredible experience of it. And the other person's going, oh, I hate this. I don't want to be here. Right. What are these idiots doing running around chasing this ball? Okay. The sense they're bringing to it is very different from the person who's really enjoying it. And the sense that we bring, the sense that we make of a moment creates our experience of that moment. Right. This is why we actually have a lot of power. The Stoics pointed this out. Epictetus pointed this out. The only place we have power is with our conceptions, i.e. our sense making, or our choices, or our frames. So the only place we have the power is with our conceptions and right. So this isn't like new stuff. And we have a lot of power here to do this. We can change our own sense that we make of a moment. That's going to change how we experience the moment, which is immediately going to change how we engage, which is going to change the results that we get. And this I often tie in with what's called the be, do, have model. Right? Your being is your created being through the sense you're making of the moment. Then certain behaviors will unfold from that spontaneously, and you will get the results that they logically lead to. So this is like a huge thing. Now, how hypnosis works is a lot of the time it's inviting people into different organizations of reality. Right? You're inviting them into a different set of sense about this moment and what's happening in this moment. And that sense creates their experience of the moment. So you can get big shifts in experience through helping people shift their sense. So you talk, right, what we're suggesting. And you also talked about framing. Now, the reason that these can be treated differently, and again, this is not for you, Alex, because you know this, but this is for the people listening to the recording. The reason these can be treated differently is because if you're doing formal hypnosis, you will do a lot of framing at the front end to make sense of the formal processes you're going to do ahead of time. If you didn't do that framing at the front end, and indeed, if the overall frame around the conversation wasn't we're doing hypnosis, but we're having a conversation, you'd still be able to use suggestion, but but within a different, broader frame, right? But here's the thing. You ever seen that film Boiler Room? It's an old film, about
with the guy selling stocks and stuff.
Yeah. And there's a phrase that when they're training the new salespeople or scammers, it's always be closing, right? They always say always be closing.
Yeah.
So I got this little bit of business I take in when I'm doing formal hypnosis, and if I'm doing influencing, just conversational influencing as well, which is always be framing. Always be framing. In a sense, every suggestion is frame management. It's either enhancing the current frame, modifying it, taking it in a different direction. In a sense, you are constantly feeding into the sense-making processes of the person you are working with. Now, so far as I'm concerned, suggestion is just that. That is what suggestion is, right? Hypnotic suggestion. So for people listening, when we say suggestion, we're not talking about, hey, I would suggest that you check out the new Kiefer Sutherland thing on Netflix. Not that kind of suggest. So yeah, we're always suggesting, and we suggest by seeding ideas, i.e., the ideas we seed are the sort of units of sense, so to speak, that we're inviting people to bring to that moment. And we do this. Now, you were talking about
What
unconscious
about?
suggestion.
Mhm.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah,
What were you going
that's
to
what
say
I'm
there
curious
about?
about. So I get the suggestions that you can see to enrich a frame or to provide a new frame. Other things like presuppositions that are kind of the same thing, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but when I said suggestions, I was referring specifically to the ones that are where you're trying to provide something directly to the unconscious mind without the conscious mind being aware of it. To like for an example, an embedded command.
Right.
The whole buy now. You should probably have a good
That's a.
understanding of.
I would say that's a crap idea by now, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. I just couldn't think of a better
No,
example
no,
of
but
what
like
would be a.
it's a really, really good illustration because it's one of the things I think people. There's a distinction. A lot of people, when they're learning hypnosis and learning about embedded suggestions, they get this. They miss this distinction, right? And it like screws up half of what they're doing with their embedded commands, right? Um, in fact, an embedded command is not a useful idea. An embedded suggestion is a better idea. So notice that buy now ambiguity, right? And for
Mhm.
people not recognizing this, you go back to get some old 80s sales training manuals that have been NLP influenced. You'll find people going, so by now, you're probably realizing that this is a great product for you, right? And the idea is that people hear this buy now and like a zombie, they read it as purchase now and they go, yes, I want to buy now. Um, or somebody's like promoting their book, an event, and they go, so if we do this, buy the book, then we can, so these sorts of behavioral injunctions. Now, buy now is a command to behavior,
Mhm.
right? My view is that commands to behavior, whether they are embedded commands or whether they are done in post hypnotic suggestion, don't work that well or that reliably outside of consciousness,
Mhm.
right? I think they tend to work better. So if you do like a behavioral
A-
suggestion,
And this includes things like from now on you're gonna, I don't know, stop smoking. You're
yeah,
gonna forget about that. You want to have a smoke after having food or things
yeah,
like that.
yeah, these are all behavioral instructions,
Hmm.
right? Now, if you think about why do people behave the way they behave, not because somebody told them to behave that way, they behave that way because of the sense they're making. Right. So you've got two levels. You can drop stuff in. You can give behavioral injunctions or you can drop in new sense. Right. Which is like sometimes in my definition of hypnosis, the use of language and communication to direct attention, lead cognition, and seed ideas. This is dropping in the new sense making frame, right? Or the new bits of business for sense making. So you can do that. Um, you can do that. Like if you were to say to somebody, you know, you can just enjoy this moment because it feels good to just relax deeply, right? Now, you've marked out some things there. Enjoy this moment, feel good, relax deeply. But you'll notice that enjoy this moment, you could go, well, that's a behavioral thing. Actually, but it's an emotional element to it. Enjoy, right? There's an experiential element to it. So, and you see, you can just, you can find you can enjoy a moment like this easily because right now, easily, I might lean on and mark that out because easily is an idea that gets processed. It's not a command to behavior. So really, you're better off dropping in by analog marking, right? And analog marking is where you sort of, for the people listening to this, where you tonally lean on
Hmm.
something, right? Or you might just mark it out in another way, like I did
Yeah.
just there with the words mark it out, right? With your gestures, with your tone, whatever it might be. Um, Now, the way I work when I'm doing hypnotic stuff is I use things that will evoke ideas that they have to make sense through or connect with that are likely to bring them in directions of experiences, not behaviors, right? So if I was going to give a post hypnotic suggestion to a smoker, I wouldn't say something like, from now on, when somebody offers you a cigarette, you will say no, right? I might say something like, or if I was going to, I'd say, from now on, when somebody offers a cigarette, you'll be able to enjoy just saying no because it feels good to do so.
Hmm. Hmm.
Connecting deeply now as you go beyond everything that you have left behind, right? Now, I'm suggesting ideas. I'm not saying this is how you will behave, right? So I want to have sense made. I want to give them sense that creates not just behavioral instructions, right?
You're what I got from that is that you're providing a new frame that allows for a different kind of behavior to naturally occur.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Because it's the be do have model again, right? If you take
Mm.
being as your being in the moment is how you're seeing the moment, the sense you're making of the moment. Every I've got this definition of trance, right? Because people love trance in the world of hypnosis. To me, trance is any state of being that you're in from which automated behaviors emerge.
Hmm.
Now, these occur all the time. If I'm feeling fearful before speaking in public, the automated behavior that might emerge might be my throat closing up or something like that, or me having to run to the toilet or something like that, right? If I'm feeling angry, I might snap at somebody. That might be the automated behavior. It wasn't that I sort of thought to myself, should I snap at them? I think actually snapping at them is probably a good idea, but it just happens.
Hmm.
Or maybe I say something and there's a certain edge to my tone that I didn't consciously choose because it's the automated behavior that comes out of the trance that I'm in.
Hmm.
The trance that I'm in is underpinned by the sense that I'm making of the moment, right? So be, do, have is always at play. So be is the trance we're in, do is the behavior that comes from it, have is the result that we get from that behavior. Right? This is a play whether we're talking naturalistic trances, you know, um, the trances that have us rise up in life or the trances that have us lay low. It's true in the moment. So if you're a hypnotist and you're doing change work with hypnosis, you want to bring somebody into a new organizational reality that creates a different ground of being from which different behaviors spontaneously emerge, instead of trying to do this lazy thing of just dictating the
Giving
behavior.
suggestions. Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah. So that's kind of the model that I was kind of operating, or what you're saying fits what I was kind of the way I was organizing it in my
mm,
head. In that, with suggestions, I don't think generally, I believe it would take a ton of suggestions the way you'd have propaganda where you're exposed to the same message many, many times over
mm,
for something to actually
mm,
stick to
mm,
change a behavior or thought pattern.
mm.
And generally, the weight I would say is very little. Um, so just to clarify, you don't think suggestions have much of a bearing or capacity to be able to change behavior
I
if
think
when you're changing, if it's suggestions for behavior.
if it's behavioral level suggestions, I think they tend to be not overly strong,
Hmm.
right? Now, like you might go in a moment, like, I don't know, in a moment, if you want to influence somebody's behavior, how do you want to influence it specifically? Right now, if I want somebody to step to the left, step to the right in a moment, I'm going to more like just use a direct, like direction rather than suggestion.
Yeah.
Right? Can I get you to step over here? Or um, so a lot of the time you do want people to do things immediately when you're doing formal hypnosis, but you're just going to request that they do it.
Yeah.
Right? You're going to invite them to do it. Now, there are different ways of doing that. There's some art to that. If you say, "Can I just get you to step over here for a moment?" That's different from going, "Stand here." Right?
Yeah.
There's some art to direction, but it's different from suggestion. Um,
To clarify, your definition for suggestion includes things that are consciously um the receiver consciously recognizes, or do they have to
Mm,
be things that are not?
the receiver will rarely. It depends what you mean by consciously recognize, right? There's different levels of consciousness. If I'm consciousness, you can be aware that I'm speaking to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
But were you aware that I intentionally aimed to get you to nod your head, right? So,
No.
like, you know, even though you're aware of the words, you're aware of the communication, the level of awareness, like what you notice within it and what you don't notice, you can't notice everything. You never can. This is how presuppositions work in hypnotic communication. Somebody will hear the words being said. And in the moment, if you stopped and said, "Did you understand fully step there?" They would say yes. And you say, "What was being said?" And they would only say the things that were explicit and not the things that were presupposed, even though they
Yeah.
would have heard them. So their ears hear them and their mind picks them up and their mind uses those ideas to process, but doesn't even realize it's done it. So there's that level of unconscious. But then some people like to think of unconscious as if somebody is literally unconscious. Like,
Mm-hmm.
the people that listen to things when they're going to sleep and they think, well, I'll learn in my sleep, or that unconscious means that you can deliver something while someone's not paying attention, right?
So that's interesting. What's your opinion on that when somebody's not paying attention compared to somebody when somebody is paying attention, but it passes by consciously unnoticed?
So in my view, like the direction of attention is a very important thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are a couple of styles to doing formal hypnosis. Um, one of them I call the tight facilitatory style, and one I call the floaty drifty style.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe these are just two ends of the same spectrum. So the tight facilitation style is where you're leading somebody step by step, and you're inviting mind shifts moment by moment. Very specific ones. You're calibrating. You're checking back in. So for example, if I was doing some hypnosis with you, I might have taken you through a process. You close your eyes now saying you could just relax more fully. That's right. All the way into yourself now to the point where it's almost as if you can float up, all the way up. Right. Now, I'm inviting you to follow those instructions and move your mind in certain ways, right? Um, and I want to make sure you are following those. Because if you're not, what the hell am I doing?
Mm-hmm.
However, there is another approach, which is where maybe you lead somebody into a place where their mind is not gripping so tightly with its existing ideas,
Mm-hmm.
right? And this state of mind might be called a generative trance, or Erickson would call it a therapeutic trance. The hypnotherapist Milton H. Erickson, who's a big influence on modern hypnotherapy. Um,
This is where the critical faculty or the person isn't rationalizing so well.
yeah, they're not really rationalizing because they're just drifting. They're just sort of in a pleasant state.
Mm-hmm.
And they're
And
not.
you don't care if they necessarily hear the things that you say.
Yeah, you're not being so precise or tight in your facilitation, and you'll just sort of drift around, dropping in the sorts of ideas that are useful, or telling kind of useful stories, and layering in sense on a number of different levels. Now, for me, when I'm doing that, I'm aware the person is listening, but they're not going to process everything I say.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to latch onto some pieces, and their creative faculty, their generative faculty of mind, the deep generative intelligence within them, the unconscious mind, if you like, is going to take some of that and create new things with it. But I don't know which bits specifically, and I'm not
Mm-hmm.
really too fussed as to which bits. It's like a very much more open, easy, fluid, floating, but it's also a much more emergent process. So, the more we do that, the less clear we are as to what's going to bubble out of it and that kind of thing. So yeah, there's a couple of different ways of doing it. Now,
Where do you see the application for either?
I you could use either in hypnotherapy. I like to teach very tight facilitation with people because if you can do tight, interactive, run live feedback loops, calibrate that kind of thing. If you can do that, you can do the floaty stuff super easily.
Mm-hmm.
If you learn the floaty stuff, And then you can probably only ever do the floaty stuff, and you won't actually ever do it as well as somebody who's learned that tighter stuff. It's a bit like learning to drive a car, right? If you learn on an automatic, you have a hard time driving a manual or a stick shift, right? But if
Mhm.
you learn on a manual, automatic is easy. You
Are
know.
there contexts you would choose to use one over the other?
Um, I mean, both of those are, or at least the drifty one is useful for explicit change word context, and the tight one is as well. But once you understand both, you see, like if I'm doing conversational hypnosis with somebody, I'm sort of doing a bit of a blend of both. I'm paying attention to process, but I'm going to drop in various ideas as I go. And I'm not necessarily looking for every single one to land.
Mhm.
So I'm kind of doing the drifty thing at the same time, but they think instead of being in a trance, they think they're in a conversation. Maybe they think they're thinking about something else, and I'm just dropping in these ideas.
Mhm.
So it's useful to understand the Ericksonian therapeutic trance version is you just get somebody to open up the bandwidth and drift, while you just go boom, 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 and you just drop pebbles in the pond,
Mhm.
and you kind of like just trust that something good is going to come from the good stuff that you drop in. Like casting a bunch of seeds, not planting them specifically, but you just cast the seeds, and you know that some of these seeds are going to grow. Maybe not all of them, but some of them.
Because you expect the unconscious mind to find the ones that would be relevant for it or to be able to understand and then generate something out of it.
Yeah, because provided you set the session up right, the person's gone into the session with an intent to get a certain sort of change,
Mhm.
right? So their attention is and their intentionality is on that. So their unconscious mind is going to be listening for that. I put
Mhm.
quotes around that because I'm not into an anthropomorphized unconscious mind. But like we do learn a lot outside of consciousness. We pay attention outside of consciousness, particularly when we've got a reason to pay attention to certain things and a reason to seek certain, right? Then our unconscious generative intelligence can often do a lot of really good work for us.
Mhm.
So, like, it's like Timothy Leary when he used to do the therapeutic psychedelic trips. The key idea, Richard Alpert and Timothy Leary, they had this idea of set and setting. That's the most important thing,
Mhm.
right? So basically, you get the set and the setting right, then you do the trip. Now, the trip is going to go where it goes, but the value comes out of the set and setting. If you just do the trip without the set and setting, well, the trip's still going to go where it goes, but it's got no reason. And you're not going to connect up around a certain theme or around a certain core. So the set is like, what are we looking to achieve here? What's the outcome? What would we love to get from this session? What's the
Mhm.
shift we'd love to make? And the setting is just making sure the environment's right, like the person can really relax into it and they can be how they need to be with the experience. Now, you can take that straight into something like formal hypnosis and hypnotherapy and go, right. So we set our intention, we know what we want to create, and we create the setting by doing our general framing for the session and making sure the right kind of sense is being made around the session. And then we can do what we like. We can just do some floaty, drifty stuff and drop some things in. We could maybe go, let's go for this type facilitation. You can do a mixture of both. So there.
Thank you. I'm curious. What comes to mind is this experiment that was done where they started playing, I believe it was German or Spanish music in a supermarket or grocery store. You might have heard
Mhm.
of this one. And they monitored the sales. I think it was of wines or beverages, and they found out that when they were playing one, it corresponded with higher sales for that type.
Right. Right. I can totally
Where,
believe that. Yeah. Because it's about, again, what gets evoked in the person.
yeah, yeah,
Right.
and would you consider this more on the suggestion side,
Absolutely.
suggestion that is framing?
Yeah. So, like, let's take that. That's a really, really good example. Like, imagine instead they'd have just replaced that with some sort of loop going, buy wine, buy wine, buy wine. Right. Well, first of all, people are going to hear that and hear that and they're just as likely to go, "Uh, why are they telling me to buy wine? What? So there's nothing that gets evoked. There's just an instruction given, right? Whereas the music evokes. Music is very evocative. Back to this idea again of hypnotic communication is about evocation more than it's about information,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you get somebody into a mood or get somebody making an association, now and again with regard to consciousness and unconsciousness, people pick up stuff outside of consciousness. The other day I'd been singing a song, and then Lexi had not consciously recognized me singing the song. But half an hour later, she said, I've got this earworm. I don't know, like, why this song's going around my head. It's like, well, I was singing it half an hour ago. It's like, were you? So, she was aware that I was singing the song, but she wasn't conscious of me
Mm-hmm.
singing the song. So it's like an unconscious awareness. Um, Consciousness is less important in hypnosis and receiving things than awareness is. People think they're the same thing, but you can be unconsciously aware of a lot of things, right? Like when you drive, like a lot of the time,
Mm-hmm.
everyone's had the experience of like, oh, I'm here already, or driving a journey they're familiar with unconsciously instead of the journey they intended to drive because they're more used to the one over the other. Now you could say, well, oh, I'm here. I'm meant to go there. Were you conscious? Well, you were conscious of something, but you weren't conscious of everything you were paying attention to drive. Most of what you attend to when you're driving, but not in your consciousness. So that happens all the time. And a lot of the time, we want to get people's attention. We want to work with the attention that we have. That doesn't have to be conscious. And sometimes there's that game in hypnosis of trying to distract the consciousness whilst keeping the attention, and then feeding things in at that more unconscious level.
Yeah, that would be, and stuff like that would fall with confusion or other
Um,
tactics like that. I'm curious,
yeah.
how much importance would you give, or how much weight would you give to these kinds of? Okay, so let's say we've established suggestions for behavior generally very little weight, don't have much of an effect. Shouldn't really focus. The focus should be more on evocation, on creating, or even changing the frame, changing the attitude, or the shifting of perspective.
Mm.
Um, how much weight? How long is a piece of string? I guess, but what I'm trying to understand is how much focus should really be put on providing suggestions to do that rather than something else. But I know that's quite open ended.
So suggestions to do what specifically?
To evoke or to try to shift a perspective, but on more of an unconscious awareness level.
Well, look, in some senses, this consciousness unconsciousness thing is a slight distraction,
Mm-hmm.
right? Uh, In truth, if I'm doing hypnosis with somebody, rarely, I'm rarely thinking about consciousness and unconsciousness. I'm just thinking about response. So all I'm thinking
Mm-hmm.
about is response. Now, I don't care whether that, where consciousness is in relation to that response, so long as I get the response. Now, in a sense, there's a difference between somebody asked me in an open frame in the Nexus at the weekend, what was the difference for me between influence and persuasion, right? And because I'd said they were different things to me. Persuasion to me is
Influence is more
about,
innate, right?
yeah,
It's more of a thing you have.
to me, when you influence, well, it could be more innate. You could look at it like that, but strategic and tactical influence, let's say, right?
Mm-hmm.
Influencing. If I want to influence somebody, what I want to do is I want to drop some stuff in so they find themselves in a place, right? They find themselves in a particular view, or they find themselves in a particular perspective. It just seems like they kind of spontaneously arrived there,
Mm-hmm.
right? Whereas persuasion is more like I have to build a case for it. And like,
Mm-hmm.
it's like I'm appealing to their critical faculty to try and get them to talk themselves round, or I'm talking them round, instead of like somebody just popping into a new way of seeing things or something like that. So when I'm influencing, I'm much more interested in that, where somebody arrives. But what I'm not, so I'm thinking about response. I'm not thinking about conscious and unconscious, but I might think about reasoning, rational, cajoling, debating, arguing versus just creating the circumstances in which somebody arrives at a particular realization or perspective,
Mm-hmm.
right? So for me, that's a more useful distinction. I think I know it's not simple to talk about, but it's a more useful distinction than conscious and unconscious mind. And it completely, again, for anyone who's listening to this who's not interested in formal hypnosis, it's still there if you're looking to influence people in everyday life. A lot of people will go persuasion. That's a mistake. They want to get somebody to move their mind and they try and persuade them. They use persuading style tactics, right? And you don't want to, you want to invite somebody to try on a different reality so they can look at it and experience it firsthand. And then if they like it, they're going to go with it more if it's well shaped for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know if that speaks to the positive intention behind your question about, conscious or otherwise.
Yeah, no, it does. I think the thing I was trying to get my head around was how much weight or how much focus or suggestion in comparison to other things that you can do to influence outcomes or to get an outcome that you do want.
So what kind of other
Uh,
things?
I was thinking specifically in terms of like hypnosis, but I know that's a very narrow thing, so I don't want to get too into
Well, you
just
could do,
that.
but like if you see hypnosis, what do you mean specifically by that?
For example, I remember I watching recently one of your videos when you did a number block for
Mm,
somebody, and I found it interesting that you just provided the suggestion while the person was listening to you that they would forget that. And I was thinking how much is due to the suggestion that you provided for them to not remember, I think it was the number 4,
hmm
and but you didn't say 4, the number between 3 and 5. And how much of that is based on the framing that you already did leading up to that you are a hypnotist, you are capable of doing I don't know what, and then you took
Right.
them up a hypnotic ladder so that they already were committed so much into that experience and into this reality that they just accepted that, and that's why it
In
worked.
instance, because I think I know the video you're talking about. In that instance, the latter, the
Hmm.
framing, the buy-in, the hypnotic ladder, that was more important than the suggestion in the moment, right? But that doesn't mean, there's the old saying, there's more than one way to skin a cat. Sorry, animal lovers. It's just a cultural expression.
There's more
Um,
than one way to grate a carrot.
yeah, there's more than one way to grate a carrot, to grate very vegetable lovers. I know. Hang on. Um, so, you can achieve the same thing in a variety of different ways. This is something that magicians know. There's an old rule in the world of magic, performance magic, close-up magic, whatever. Don't do the same trick twice.
Hmm.
That's not strictly true. You can do the same trick, just don't do it the same way twice. Right. So there's usually, like in close-up magic, for example, there are a variety of different ways you can achieve any effect. Now, with hypnosis, you have communication tools, you have different ways of bringing things about. The more ways you know how to do it, the more likely you are. And in NLP, this is requisite variety, right? The element within the system that has the greatest number of choices, behavioral choices, will become the governing element within that system, or will be able to handle the greatest number of perturbations in what's going on, i.e., how does this person respond to what you're doing? So you can call this requisite variety, you can call it adaptiveness, whatever. You want to be able to bring about the same kind of thing in a variety of different ways, because if one way doesn't work, you want to be able to pivot to another way, maybe. So in that particular instance, with that potential was more about buy-in ahead of time and more about stepping up the hypnotic ladder. Um, so it's happening at a different logical level, so to speak, from the specific suggestion that marks the moment.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
you can see the way I give that suggestion, I do in a really old school way, probably closer to the behavioral injunction bit that I said doesn't generally work that well.
Hmm.
Right? If it's going to work, the behavioral injunction, it's because somebody buys into the fact that they're hypnotized. Right? Then you can get away with straight behavioral injunction
Yeah,
stuff.
of course, because
Right?
they're already in the frame that that's possible to happen, so that behavior would naturally occur from the frame that they're in.
Right. So
That's why.
if I believe you're a hypnotist, I believe you've hypnotized me, and then you tell me something's going to happen. The sense I make is, well, that's going to happen because I'm hypnotized and he's a hypnotist, and I believe the hypnosis is real. So it
Yeah.
can happen for that reason. So you can be really clumsy or really unsophisticated with your suggestions, got really heavy levels of buy-in for the process and for you and this kind of thing, right? So you can run that in formal hypnosis. Can't do that in conversational hypnosis. So you have to structure your suggestions better. You have to be dancing in the moment more clearly. Um, so in that instance, you might pick a bit of strategy and suggestion work that's going to work better. So you talked about amnesias. Okay. I went through a little phase where I would play with getting name amnesias in casual contexts without warning, without any pre announcement that I was going to do it, that kind of thing. And I tried a number of different methods. So, like, one of the first methods that I started exploring with was to say to somebody, yeah, go on.
I think this could be a pretty interesting topic that we could expand a lot into. Should we open a new close this episode and start a new one? Because I think we
All
can
right.
get
Yep.
into
Get
like
it
things
up.
like surprise, confusion, a lot of things here, which I think would be really interesting to hear.
Okay. So, for anyone who's listening to this, know that we're pausing this, but the next episode that you encounter is likely to be Alex and I talking about other tools of more informal approaches to hypnosis, I think,
Hmm.
strategies and tactics and the like. And by the way, I'll also say this: if you're not interested in explicit hypnosis, this stuff applies to influential communication. If you're interested in being a better strategic and tactical influencer.
Yeah, absolutely. Hypnosis I see as a great developmental context to really sharpen up your skills in a very extreme environment for which you can then use everywhere.
Yeah. Okay, let's round this out and then we'll dive into the next conversation.
Cool.